So hello everyone and welcome to our final event of the semester. Today we'll be learning more about our parent organization, the Society for American Archivists. Here to speak with us is Alison Clemens. Alison is the head of processing at Manuscripts and Archives in Yale University, where she manages MSSA's accessioning and processing program, teaches instruction sessions on assessing and interpreting primary source material, and provides reference support. Alison is also the vice chair and chair-elect of the Society of American Archivists Membership Committee and has also served in leadership positions on the SAA Archival Workers Emergency Fund Organizing Committee, the SAA Committee on Education, the SAA Manuscript Repository Section, the SAA Awards Committee, and the SAA Archival History Section. She is an MSIS graduate of the University of Texas at Austin School of Information, where she specialized in archives and special collections and completed a museum studies portfolio. Alison is particularly interested in user experience in special collections, literary and historical manuscripts, uniting technical services with frontline user services, and the ongoing education, development, and support of archivists and special collections librarians. Without further ado, I'll pass the mic, as it were, to Alison. Thank you so much for being here and speaking with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure. So, as mentioned, I am an archivist at Yale. I've been here for 7 years or so, and I graduated from library school myself from UT, as Marley mentioned, in 2012. So I've been active with SAA about since then and was in my own SAA student chapter at University of Texas as well. So I'm really excited to get to talk with you all about what SAA is like. It was kind of staggering to hear all of my SAA involvement listed in that way at once. So as that indicated, I have some experience with a lot of different corners of the organization, but certainly not with all of them. So I'm excited to try to give a broad overview. I've also tried to tailor this a little bit in some of the areas that Marley mentioned that you all are particularly interested in too. So I don't think, I've tried to be thorough, but I don't think that this is comprehensive, but at least hopefully it's a good initial start. So let's get started then. I want to start off by talking a little bit about just like SAA basics. I think, this will probably not be new information to all of you, but I think it's useful to just like really start at the beginning. And so the first question that comes to mind then is like, what is SAA, right? So SAA was founded in 1936. It's North America's oldest and largest national professional association dedicated to the needs and interests of archives and archivists. So SAA represents more than 6,000 professional archivists employed by governments, universities, businesses, libraries, and historical organizations nationally. So that's pretty broad. During my archival career, I have really only worked in academic settings. So, I have sort of spent time in the corners of the organization that are most focused on academic libraries and their concerns. But, certainly SAA has many, many government archivists, people from corporate archives, et cetera. So even though that's sort of my own personal leaning, I think the organization is generally good about being balanced about the different kinds of repositories that its members come from. So all of the work undertaken by SAA on behalf of its members and on behalf of archives and their users is guided by the following mission, vision, and then the core values, which we'll look at in a second. So the vision is that SAA empowers archivists to achieve professional excellence and foster innovation to ensure the identification, preservation, understanding, and use of records of enduring value. And the mission is that SAA is a vital community that promotes the value and diversity of archives and archivists and serves as the preeminent resource for the profession. So that's sort of like what SAA is trying to do. And then a little bit about SAA's values. SAA is committed to advancing the public standing of archivists, ensuring the diversity of its membership and leaders, the profession, and the archival record, fostering an open and inclusive culture of creativity, collaboration, and experimentation across the association. Association is sort of a general term for an organization like SAA. Providing excellent member service, and ensuring transparency, accountability, integrity, professionalism, and social responsibility in conducting its activities. So I like to, SAA has a lot of different things that it works on. I like to go back to those core values and the mission and vision to sort of like focus on like what it is that SAA is trying to do and the values that it's committed to in carrying out its goals. So then speaking of like, what is SAA? Another question then is, who is SAA? So SAA is made up of a lot of different groups. I think first and foremost among those are the SAA members. And I should have mentioned at the start of the presentation too, I'll share these slides as soon as I finish going through here. I'll get the share link and I'll send that to you all so that you have these slides and you don't have to like try to worry about remembering all of this. So yeah, SAA is made up, of course, of its members, I think most centrally, and then sort of working at the top down, so to speak. Council is really SAA's executive group, and I'll talk more about them in a moment. And then Council appoints a variety of different kinds of groups, including committees, task forces, boards, working groups, and representatives. And then there are also SAA sections. So sections are sort of like interest groups, which I'll talk about more as well in a moment. Student chapters like yours, the SAA Foundation, which is sort of SAA's, I guess, financial and philanthropic arm, SAA staff. So SAA actually has people working for the organization who are not archivists, but who are what they call like association professionals, like people who are professionals at administering these kinds of professional organizations or associations. And then again, all SAA members. So I think it's useful to sort of like see this visually. So like membership is the biggest block there, and everything sort of like flows from those SAA members. So membership elects council. Council is elected, which I'll talk about more in a second. And that council then appoints those different committees, boards, task forces, working groups, representatives, and affiliated groups. And membership is also responsible for creating, the roundtables part is sort of outdated, but creating sections and also creating student chapters. So, you know, SAA already has many different sections, but there are also processes by which someone can create a new SAA section. So if, you know, like let's say that there is some aspect of archival practice that wasn't represented in the sections, a member then could basically create a petition and a process to follow an outlined process to have a section be created. So yeah, so that's sort of like what that looks like visually. I included the link to where I sourced the image from. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of those key pieces now. Okay, so what is SAA Council? As I mentioned, the SAA Council is SAA's governing body. And council is composed of the officers, which are elected by the general membership. Sorry, that's the background noise that I promised you. Elected by the general membership. And the president, who accedes to a one-year term after serving a one-year term as vice president and president-elect, the vice president and president-elect, and the treasurer, who serves a three-year term. And there are sort of like different committees then that are sprung from council, but that's the most sort of like succinct way of putting it. And the responsibility of council really is to ensure several things. They have a really big job. So to ensure SAA's financial stability and growth, to develop and implement strategic priorities, to provide leadership and direction for SAA and its component groups, to build and coordinate relationships with individuals and groups outside of SAA, and to provide oversight for the Society's executive office, so SAA staff and the SAA executive director, who is the head of that staff. Again, generally, SAA Council is elected by general membership for three-year terms. Again, that also includes SAA president, who's elected for a one-year term, vice president, president-elect for a one-year term, and the treasurer for a three-year term. And I just included some of the council, actually all of the council folks here. So you can see I've listed the SAA president, the vice president, president-elect, treasurer, and then each of the SAA members. And if any of you have had the opportunity to get involved with SAA or to attend an SAA annual meeting, you might also know that the SAA Council has like liaison responsibilities to the different component groups. So if you were to attend, let's say, an issues and advocacy section meeting, I don't know off the top of my head, but one of the council members is assigned as a liaison to issues and advocacy and then reports at their meetings. So it's like there are all these mechanisms in place to try to make sure that the different parts of SAA are communicating with one another. Okay, so a little bit more about the different appointed groups. Sort of first among those, at least in my mind, are the SAA committees. And the SAA committees are really, the way that I think about it is that the committees are really responsible for carrying out the business of SAA. So the Committee on Education, for example, people on the Committee on Education are certainly interested in education, but the primary responsibility of the Committee on Education and what makes it the Committee on Education is that the Committee on Education, COE, as we call it when we're trying not to say that 100 times, is responsible for administering SAA's educational offerings. And I'll talk more about those later. But it's not, the Committee on Education is not intended to be an interest group. It's really intended to administer the SAA educational program. Similarly, with the membership committee, which I'm the vice chair, chair-elect of, we're responsible for stewarding and leading SAA services and programs pertaining to membership. So committees are really intended to be doing the business of SAA. Committees are appointed by the vice president, but there's an application process for that. So the way that it works, and this is sort of the last thing I think that I'll talk about this evening, but the way that it works is that people apply for these appointed positions, and then the SAA vice president reviews all of those applications and appoints people to the committees. And I included a link to the full list of committees and boards. And I want to mention the committees particularly, although this is true of the boards as well, really do develop services and events for SAA members. So for example, the membership committee that I'm on administers the SAA mentoring program as well as career counseling services. And there's also a program committee that creates and administers the SAA annual meeting. So, the committees are a really important part of how SAA's business is conducted. And then sort of a parallel to committees are the boards. And those are really both like publication based. There's the American Archivists editorial board and the publications board. And, both of those, as the name suggests, are responsible for developing published resources for SAA's members. Okay, so a few more appointed groups. There are also task forces, which are, I think, quite similar to committees, except they're sort of formed on an as-needed basis, and they're established by the council to deal with matters of special concern. So they're usually appointed and charged for a prescribed period of time. So the two current task forces right now are the Archival Compensation Task Force and the Task Force on the A-Census 2 Work Plan. So both of those task forces were established and charged by council and have specific tasks that they're doing. I'm not terribly familiar with either of those task forces. I know a little bit about them, but just to give a little bit of an example, the Task Force on A-Census 2 Work Plan. A-Census was done several years ago now. If off the top of my head, I think it was circa 2005, to do basically a demographic survey of SAA membership and gather information about SAA members. So a lot has changed about everything since 2005. And so SAA applied for a grant. I can't remember the granting agency off the top of my head. I think I do, but I don't want to be wrong. So I'll just say they were awarded a grant by a granting agency and are in the process of basically redoing that A-Census. So the A-Census 2 Work Plan Task Force is responsible for creating that work plan to do that pretty significant data collection and analysis. And then similar to task forces, working groups are also established by SAA Council to deal with matters of special concern, but they're usually ongoing and they're not necessarily time limited. So a few examples of current working groups, I think this is maybe an exhaustive list, are the Crisis, Disaster, and Tragedy Response Working Group, the Dictionary Working Group, and the Intellectual Property Working Group. So similar to task forces, but like a little bit more general in their scope and less sort of like project based. Okay, a little bit more about appointed positions, and I think this is the last part of this section. So this is something that I don't know a lot about, but there are also SAA representatives and SAA affiliated groups. So SAA reps represent SAA on relevant groups. So like the Academy of Certified Archivists, there's an SAA rep for ACA. There's a SAA rep for the International Council on Archives Experts Group on Archival Description. And I think my understanding of that program is that it's basically intended to formalize a liaison and communication mechanism between those, between SAA and allied or affiliated groups. So it's like an individual who's representing SAA to these other organizations. And then I think my understanding of the affiliated groups is that there are groups affiliated in some way with SAA. So for example, joint task forces with other cultural heritage professional organizations. And I included links to full list of both the affiliated groups and the reps. So an SAA affiliated group might be SAA and Rare Book and Manuscript section joint task force on some particular issue pertaining to both archives and special collections or rare books. So that's a little bit about the reps and affiliated groups. I haven't engaged with that very much. I think, usually folks don't unless they're asked to fill those positions, but I think it's still, useful to sort of see how SAA has its eyes on a full landscape of cultural heritage work beyond just its own organization. Okay, so like I said, I was going to talk a little bit about how to get involved with appointed groups. Again, it's all volunteer based. So the deadline this year is January 15th, 2021. There's a session tomorrow about that volunteer process, which basically involves completing an application with your information and a statement of interest. So they'll probably talk more about this tomorrow. And since Courtney, the SAA VP, is the person who's going to be doing those appointments, she's the best person to talk with about it. But I would say that if that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to pursue it. I was appointed to the Committee on Education right when I got out of graduate school, if I recall correctly. I think I had just started my first job at University of Houston. So, certainly it's an opportunity that's open to new professionals. And it's, of course, these different groups benefit from having new professionals on them. And I would say if you want to volunteer, what you want to do is you want to identify maybe 1 to 2 opportunities that are of interest to you. So sometimes I have found that sometimes people apply for, they'll say that they're interested in like 15 different component groups, and whether it's fair or not, and I would say that it's not fair, but whether it's fair or not, that is seen as a less substantial interest than if you had sort of narrowed your preferences to like 1 or 2 groups that you're interested in. So I would encourage you to do that. On the SAA website, there's a list of different vacancies that come up, because all of these SAA appointed positions have specified terms. So, I mentioned council generally has 3-year terms. It depends on the committee. I think most of them have either 2-year or 3-year terms. So, because of the way that the cycles work, one committee might have 2 open positions, another committee might have 3 open positions. So you can see a full list of positions that are coming open on the SAA website. So that's a good way to sort of start narrowing down what you might be interested in. So yeah, to my knowledge, this information session that they're doing tomorrow, I think is the first time that they've done that kind of open information session. So I think that's really nice. I hope that it'll make the process clearer and more transparent to folks, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions about that as well. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving along here. A little bit about sections. I suspect that probably some of you have heard a little bit about sections or have engaged in them. Sections, if you'll recall from our little org charty looking slide, sections are created by SAA members. So they're really, they're basically like affinity groups almost. They're communities of interest around particular topics, identities, or areas of professional practice. And they usually, I think almost always, have an email list and some kind of programming at the SAA annual meeting. So, for example, the description section might have programming about a new international descriptive standard that's coming up, or something like that. And sections also have various resources available to their members. It really, really depends based on the section. Marley mentioned that I have been previously involved with the manuscript repository section. We did a pilot project that was like a resume review opportunity for folks in that section to have their resumes reviewed by more experienced professionals or hiring managers. So that was something that we did for the members of our section. I know that some sections have their own mentoring programs. It really, really varies section by section. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that generally some sections have resources that are of interest to the people who are in those sections. And you can really join as many sections as you want to join. So there's no cost to joining a section. I guess the only cost would be to your email inbox, but you can always adjust your your emails accordingly. But yeah, it's not like you have to be, you can be, but it's not like you have to be choosy. So if you're still sort of, identifying areas of professional interest for yourself, I think it's certainly fine to, join as many sections as sort of strikes your fancy. So I think that that's nice that SAA makes that open. And so I just included some example sections. The accessibility and disability section was established in the last couple of years. It's a relatively new section, and it was established by member petition and member request. So that's a really important section that's just sort of come on the scene a little bit more recently. Archivists and archives of color, description, diverse sexuality and gender, electronic records, issues in advocacy, Native American archives, and students and new archives professionals. So I tried to sort of like pick a list that would give you a sense of the different kinds of sections. Like some of them are really focused on an area of archival practice, like description. Some of them are focused on identity, like archivists and archives of color, although that's a little bit of both. Electronic records is sort of like format focused, and students and new professionals obviously is sort of like demographically focused. So I think if you're an archivist, there's something for everyone in the SAA sections. So okay, so how do you get involved with sections? I think engaging in the email discussion lists is a good way to do that. If you're already on those lists, you'll see that some of them are fairly high traffic, some of them are lower traffic, but it can often be a good way to get advice about, for example, there's a design records section that my colleague who's the architectural records archivist is in. I think that sometimes when she has questions about architectural, I don't know, like standards or shelving enormous things that she has to worry about that I don't have to worry about as much, she can, she can consult her colleagues on that list and get really good advice. And another way to get involved is to attend the section meetings at the SAA annual meeting. And you can also volunteer for leadership positions in those sections. And that volunteer process works a little bit differently than the SAA appointed groups process. Those are, you volunteer generally, but those leadership positions are generally elected. So the sections each have their own, they really vary, but generally speaking, they each have their own steering committee. And that steering committee is responsible for, identifying the direction that the section wants to go in for the year, administering any programs that they have, like the mentoring program and one of the sections that I mentioned, et cetera. So if you're interested in running for that steering committee, you volunteer for that. And usually what happens is that they announce that nominations are open in the early spring. So, it can be intimidating, I think, for anyone to stand for election for something. Like that's really, that's really putting yourself out there, right? Like I think that's a little stressful for some of us. But I think it's a really nice way to get involved in SAA because you have a little bit more control over it. Like I encourage everyone to volunteer for appointed groups if they're interested in that too. But I think that the section leadership tends to be a little bit less competitive. And in fact, often sections, sections need people to run them, right? Like there are many, many SAA sections and they all need people to run them. And SAA has a lot of members, but by the time you split that up among the different sections, often one section will have to ask several times for volunteers to run. So I would say it's not uncommon to run unopposed, although I think every time I have run for election, I have had at least one person running against me, but it's not unusual on a ballot to see that someone's running unopposed. So all of that is to say that, standing for election can be nerve-wracking, or at least can be like a hurdle, a mental hurdle to get over. But I do think that it's a really relatively low barrier way to get involved in the organization. So that's a little bit about that. And then I want to talk a little bit more about some of the specific resources and features of SAA. So we'll get into that right now. So a little bit about education. So I mentioned earlier, education is managed by the Committee on Education, and then there are staff at SAA who are dedicated to SAA's educational programming. That's the SAA Education Department. So the COE and the SAA Education Department really work very, very closely together to administer SAA's educational offerings. And as you probably all know, SAA has a lot of courses that it offers. They've been a little bit hampered, as you know, we all have, obviously, with programming by COVID and safety concerns. But they do have courses that usually they offer in person, and they have courses that they offer online. So the sort of thematic areas that they offer courses in are general archival knowledge, selection, appraisal, and acquisition, arrangement and description, preservation and protection, outreach, advocacy, and promotion, managing archival programs, and ethical and legal responsibilities. And the costs for those educational offerings are really based on the course format and the duration. So, obviously, like a 2-day in-person course is going to be more expensive than an hour-long online webinar. It sort of depends on what the offering is. And sometimes SAA makes it so the courses are free. So there's a free course, for example, right now on salary negotiation, which I think is great. If I recall correctly, it's actually a 2-part free online webinar. And there's also a free online course on advocacy at home that's sort of focused on like local, I think sort of like local and state level advocacy efforts. That looks really interesting. So I haven't taken either of those, but I think that it's really great that SAA is making that available for folks. And obviously it's in everyone's best interest to have things like webinars on salary negotiation be free of cost for members. So that's a little bit about that. And then a little bit more about a couple of specific certificate programs. SAA currently has 2 certificate programs that it runs. The first is the Digital Archive Specialist, or DAS certificate. And that's really focused on practical knowledge and application tools for managing born digital records. So if you're like me, which you all are probably smarter than I am, maybe there are courses that you did not take in graduate school, or specific training that you didn't get in graduate school that you think would be useful to you in your work, particularly for born digital records. So when I did my graduate degree, I was really focused on archives and special collections. And so I took special collections courses, and I did not take digital archives courses. And all of my friends from graduate school are digital archivists. And so they have continued to make fun of me about that. But, it worked out pretty well for me because I have taken several of the DAS courses. So I have not gotten the DAS certificate because, I'm not a digital archivist, and I don't particularly want to be a digital archivist, but those courses in that certificate portfolio, several of them have been really relevant to my work and have helped me quite a lot. So, I know if you're really interested in digital archives, and if you feel like, maybe you've gotten an introduction to that, but you just want to have sort of more in-depth training and, sort of that like seal of approval to say that you've gone through that training, I think the DAS program can be quite helpful. It can be expensive to go through that whole series, so all the better if your employer is paying for it. But certainly I think the curriculum, like you don't have to be on the certificate track to take individual pieces of the curriculum too. So it's possible to just sort of like pick and choose particular courses from a certificate program that you're interested in. And if you do decide to do the certificate program, there are specific requirements for timing, and then there's a test at the end that you have to take. So it, I think, is quite rigorous to get that certificate, but is certainly an accomplishment. And then SAA also has an arrangement and description certificate that's really focused on in-depth training to expand on the arrangement and description skill sets from the graduate level education, or to support career transitions within the archival field. So that's more specifically focused on generally on like processing training. And then a little bit about advocacy, support, and awareness. So I have not engaged with any of these groups except for the last one, but so I'm just sort of sharing what I know and understand from my work within SAA and from my colleagues. But there are a couple of committees that focus on advocacy and policy. The first is the Committee on Public Awareness, or COPA, which provides strategic information and advice to the SAA Council to enhance SAA's capacity to promote the value of archives and archivists to institutions, communities, and society. And then there's the Committee on Public Policy, which focuses on influencing legislative and regulatory or public policy decisions in governments. So I think COPA is really focused on sort of like person level awareness and advocacy work. And the Committee on Public Policy is really focused on like government and legislative level advocacy work. So again, I haven't participated on either of those committees, but I certainly think that they're important and interesting. I have also not been very active with the issues and advocacy section, but I have several friends who have engaged with them quite a lot, and INA has developed a lot of really amazing resources, including this INA advocacy toolkit that I've linked to here. And again, I'll send the slides in the chat in just a few moments so that you guys can have access to these links too. But I think if you're interested in advocacy, I would probably start with the INA blog that this advocacy toolkit is posted on. And then finally, I should say SAA does other things for advocacy support and awareness, but I'm just sort of running through my personal highlights. Finally, there's the Archival Workers Emergency Fund, or the AW Fund, which is run by the AW Fund Organizing Committee that I'm a member of and is supported by the SAA Foundation. So this is something that we founded in March as the COVID crisis was hitting the United States. And it's been a really interesting experience. It was kind of an unusual SAA experience because we're not really, it's sort of like a pilot test phase for this. Like it's something that sprung up out of relatively sudden and extraordinary need. And what we're focused on is raising funds for and distributing funds for archivists who are being adversely affected and impacted by the COVID-19 crisis. So thus far, we have raised about $140,000, and we have given almost all of that away to people. So, we're trying to manage it so that we have a few gifts sort of in our pocket so that as applications come in, we're ready to give them out. But, the organizing committee meets every 2 weeks, and every time we meet, we're like, okay, we need to make sure that we're like staying on top of our fundraising and making sure that we're getting money to the people who need it. We've been really active, and applications and donations are always welcome. The organizing committee and the program has been extended through June 2021. So I think that when we set it up, we said that we had set it up so that folks could only receive, I think we said one gift either every 6 months or every year. But yeah, we've been receiving a fairly steady stream of applications, and unfortunately, I think that the budget impacts of COVID are going to be long lasting. And so yeah, we're really dedicated to this work. We do also, one thing that I want to mention about that is that we do also host panel conversations about our work. Some of those are more general. So we had a panel conversation about mutual aid. And then next week, a week from Monday on the 14th, we're having a sort of like retrospective of what the year was like for us. So I'll include some information about that in the chat as well, in case folks are interested in attending. It should be a really nice conversation. So I've got just a few more slides. I see that something came up in the chat, but I've got just a few more to go. So I'll keep breezing through here, and then we'll come back to the chat in just a moment. So what are the benefits and costs of SAA membership? So I've talked a little bit about the benefits, but just to sort of recap and make it a little bit more succinct. So some benefits are access to professional networks and communications, like the email lists and different ways to meet folks in the field. Access to SAA educational offerings and meetings at member prices, which is nice. Access to career development resources, including the SAA membership program. And access to the American Archivist and Archival Outlook, which is a magazine that the Society publishes. And then membership costs. So that sounds like a pretty straightforward question, but it's actually quite complicated. So they vary based on employment status and annual pay. So as you all may know, it's $55 per year for student members. And then for non-student members, the cost ranges from $105 a year to $325 a year based on what your salary is. So there are different like salary brackets. So if you make X to Y, then you pay A in annual dues. And there is also a $55 bridge rate, which is available to renewing members who are unemployed, which can be exercised in two non-consecutive years. So that's all very complicated. It's a little bit more straightforward as a student, but once you sort of leave student status, it's really dependent on your pay. SAA is in the process right now of considering revision to the dues. That's really like just coming up right now. But I hope that we can simplify that structure and make it more equitable as well. So I think that's the last slide that I had. So I'll turn it back over to you all. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about anything that you have questions about.
Thank you so much. This was, it's like whew, all the information. So I'm like needing to take a minute to kind of, I've made some notes, things like that. This all looks really incredible. And I think just kind of, I'm personally wondering in terms of the educational courses that are provided, whether it's the free courses or the paid courses, is that something like, does the curriculum change? Not for the free courses, because obviously this is kind of a, obviously that's a bit more ad hoc, but with the salary courses, is that something that changes and they kind of take kind of suggestions for new course materials that might be useful? Or is it kind of a set curriculum that they kind of just not run through, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess somewhere between the two, there is quite a lot of work that goes into designing a course, creating the curriculum, et cetera. So there's, I guess, some amount of stasis there. But certainly, a big part, I would say even the major part of what the Committee on Education does is working on curriculum development. So often the Committee on Education will come up with new course offerings or sort of say like, oh, we should really have a course on linked data and archives or, whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm. And then the committee will then go about soliciting proposals for that. But I think that it's possible too for members to submit suggestions and to sort of have more of a feedback mechanism for that as well. So yeah, some things I think have been around for a while and are sort of like classic courses, but yeah, SAA is always developing new content for sure.
Brilliant, that's awesome.
Yeah, what other questions do folks have? And while people are speaking up and thinking, I'm going to put a link to the slides in the chat too.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Hi, Alison. I had a question about with the dues, like the annual dues. I saw you said it was the like 105 a year or it ranges to 325 based on like salary and like kind of a ranking thing like that. Does that mean that there's how do I say it? Like, is that you get the same thing for the membership in both of those brackets, or is like one like an entry level, and then if you pay like the 325, you get access to more things, or does everybody get the same access?
Everybody gets the same access. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is that people who are making lower salaries, basically trying to make it's not really, but somewhat proportional to income, so that, obviously if someone's making $50,000 a year, $100 is more of their annual pay than someone who's making $100,000 a year. So right. Yeah, the difference in cost is really trying to make that payment just, and it doesn't have to do with the services or opportunities that are available to people. It's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you so much. That was really informative and very thorough. I was just wondering maybe if you, I mean, you already mentioned it, but could go back and say a little bit more again about the mentoring in the membership group. Whether is that for students? Is that still when you're a professional, like in the professional field? Just a little bit more about that would be great.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the mentoring program is open to all SAA members. And so I've been on the membership committee for several years now. And before I assumed the vice chair position, I was the co-chair of the mentoring subcommittee. So I have a lot of thoughts about the mentoring program. I'm going to try to keep it relatively concise. So, we do have a lot of folks who are either new professionals or students participate in the mentoring program. And I think that that's sort of like a classic use case for it, I guess. But we also have people who are making career transitions. So, people who are librarians who are becoming archivists, or people who are communications professionals who are becoming archivists, or whatever else. And then we also have folks who are sort of like making their own career transitions. And so I remember shortly before I sort of stepped off the mentoring subcommittee, we had a few folks who were waiting for mentors who were really interested in moving into management roles and wanted to be mentored by someone who is the manager who could sort of like facilitate that transition for them, or people who had recently moved into manager roles and were like, I need like someone to help me with this. So yeah, it's really, the mentoring program is really designed to be for members at all stages of their careers. So we often get comments from people who will say like, oh, I'm kind of interested in being a mentor, but I've only been an archivist for like 2 or 3 years, and like, I don't know. And to them, we say, that's fine. Like if you apply for the program, quite frankly, like someone who's only been in the field for 2 or 3 years, they might have more helpful information to share with someone who's on the job market than someone who's been in the same job for 15 years, right? Like it's all individual based. And so it really is, it's open to everyone. And the mentoring program subcommittee does the matches and looks at all those different factors to try to, do what we can to make those matches successful.
Great, thank you. Wow, it's very helpful.
Good. Other things that are on people's minds?
Yeah, I kind of had another question about with the sections. So is that kind of like, it's almost like little clubs like within SAA for specific types of like archiving and like things in the field there, or?
Yeah, it's really sort of like, I guess it depends on the section, but it is sort of like interest or identity driven. So, for example, one of my friends is a university archivist, and he's in the college and university archive section, and that's like kind of his like home base in SAA. Those are his like SAA people that he like hangs out with and bounces ideas off of and everything. So yeah, some of them are like type of repository specific like that. Some of them are, like I mentioned, more like identity focused. Some of them are like area of practice focused. It really does depend. But yeah, I think a lot of people sort of see their affiliated sections as kind of like their home within SAA, because SAA is so big.
Right, that makes sense.
And just for everyone, we sent this out with our reminder yesterday about this event, but the volunteer informational session that Alison was mentioning is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern. That's 11 a.m. Pacific and 9 a.m. I am honestly not sure what HST stands for. That's my, there you go. So, and that's an RSVP, and I believe the link is in her slides, and we can also put the link in the chat as well for anyone who wants/needs that as well.
Yeah, it should be really good.
Well, I'm looking at they have at the bottom, if you scroll through the link that I just sent, they also have a list of the available positions, and it looks like there's, something available kind of everywhere. So I've got a whole bunch of tags to look at after all of this is over, open windows to see what interests me most and to kind of get involved in. So yeah, it looks really cool.
Yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity to get involved. It's nice because it requires a little bit of work to apply, but even if worst case scenario, you wind up not being appointed to something, then you've learned about SAA and you've learned about more of its groups. So I think it's kind of a win-win situation. And like I mentioned, I was appointed to my first committee right out of library school. So, I know that the groups are often looking for folks like that too.
Excellent. Very cool.
Any other questions that come to mind right now? Okay, well, I also included my email address in the slides. Can you all still see my slides or no?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Sometimes hard to tell with like sharing windows versus sharing screens. So I think glad that's up. So yeah, you're welcome to write to me at any time. I will also I'll stop sharing in a moment and I'll put in the link to the Fund panel that I mentioned on the 14th, so that folks have that too if you're interested in attending. But I think that's pretty much all that I have, unless there are other questions.
Absolutely. It was so informative. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it was really nice to get to talk with some of you. Christine, I hope that our paths cross at Yale someday. Dare to dream, especially in a post-COVID world.
Absolutely.
Great. I'm just going to grab that URL for that webinar. Yeah, I'm also, as you can see, well, I guess it's after hours, but I'm working from home right now too. So yeah, so here's the Eventbrite for the panel that I mentioned on the 14th at 4, if anyone's interested in the Fund retrospective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
All right. If there are no other questions, yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And yeah, I really mean it. If you have any questions or you think of anything after the fact, don't hesitate to email me. I get questions from folks about SAA all the time, so I will not think twice about any questions, and I'll be excited to hear from you. So
brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm sure you will.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thank you. Good night.